Preliminary report, second autopsy, death of Nolan Xavier Wells. Cause of death, undetermined, pending investigation. And we'll explain that as we go through the report this morning. The manner of death, undetermined, pending investigation.
There is a finding in the independent autopsy report that has been read almost everywhere as the answer. Dr. Roger Mitchell documented an area of red discoloration in the tissue at the back of Nolan Wells' head and neck, 12 inches by 8. And in the report itself, he wrote that he could not determine what caused it. That finding is now circulating as proof of what happened to Nolan.
At the time of this report, this forensic pathologist does not know the condition of Nolan Wells. He did not know whether he was conscious or unconscious when he entered the water. He said that would be significant. He said he did not know whether he was forced into the water or unforced into the water. He said that would be significant. So he said the condition of Nolan Wells before he entered the water would be the crux of the matter. It would be of utmost importance to being able to determine a cause and manner of death.
And the pathologist who documented it did not say that. He said he doesn't know. But here is what makes it more complicated than either side has acknowledged. Dr. Mitchell reported that this finding could not have been observed during the state's examination because the medical examiner did not dissect that area. So this is not a case of one doctor finding something another doctor explained away. It is a finding that exists because a second pathologist examined somewhere the first one didn't. That gap between what the report documents and what people have decided it means is what this episode is about. 3 things tonight. First, what the independent autopsy actually concluded and why the headline undetermined undersells what Dr. Mitchell wrote. His language went further than that, and it is worth reading precisely. Second, the science underneath it. Forensic pathologist Dr. Priya Banerjee, 11 years in a state medical examiner's system, now in private practice, walked through this report with Brian and Tin and explained what a second examination can and cannot establish. Some of what she says will disappoint people who wanted this report to settle the case. Third, another public correction. A detail about what Nolan was wearing, raised at the press conference, has been directly disputed by the organization it was attributed to. That's the second time in this story a widely repeated fact has come apart. And underneath all 3, the state's report, completed July 7, still not released, pending toxicology, and according to the county coroner, the decision to release it belongs to the prosecutor's office, not the medical examiner. Here's the question this episode is organized around, and I want to be honest that I can't answer it tonight. The family commissioned their own examination because they had lost confidence in the process. What came back was a report that cannot close the case, and that raises a question the official one apparently never asked. The preliminary findings came back undetermined. Cause of death undetermined. Manner of death undetermined. Both pending further investigation. That's the headline, and it's the opposite of what many people expected. This was the examination the family commissioned. This was the second opinion, and it did not contradict the state. It declined to conclude. But undetermined is not the whole of what Dr. Mitchell wrote, and the distinction matters enormously. Crump read the report's own language at the press conference. Dr. Mitchell wrote that he cannot rule out whether any intervening non-accidental factors contributed to or caused Nolan's death. Crump's summary: based on examination, foul play cannot be ruled out. Read that carefully because it is being flattened in both directions. It is not a finding that someone harmed Nolan. It is a statement that the examination could not exclude the possibility. Those are different claims, and the difference is the entire substance of this report. Some context on who conducted it. Dr. Roger Mitchell, Jr., is the former Chief Medical Examiner of Washington, D.C., and President of the National Medical Association. Dr. Banerjee, who has known his work for years, described him to Brian and Tin as very intelligent. The examination was performed July 10 in Washington, and the report is dated July 19. It was paid for by Colin Kaepernick's organization, which funds independent examinations in cases involving deaths in official custody. Now the finding everyone has fixed on. In examining the tissue at the back of the head and neck, Dr. Mitchell documented a 12 by 8-inch area of red discoloration. At the press conference, Ben Crump described having seen photographs of it and called it significant. But the report's own next line is the one that didn't travel. The cause of the finding is unclear. Dr. Mitchell reported no apparent injuries to the skin above it and no fracture beneath it. And then the detail that reframes everything. Dr. Mitchell reported this area could not have been observed during the state's examination because that examination did not cover it. Sit with that because it cuts against the assumption underneath most coverage of this case. The state is not sitting on the answer to this question. Nobody looked. Whatever this finding is, it entered the record only because a second pathologist examined an area the first examination didn't reach. Then the limitations which Dr. Mitchell listed himself in the report as barriers to reaching a conclusion. 1. He never saw the body in the condition it was in when recovered. The state's examiner did. By the time it reached Washington, the official examination had already been completed, and Dr. Mitchell received it nearly a week afterward. 2. Certain structures from the neck were not included when the body was transferred. Dr. Mitchell wrote that because of this, he could not rule out a neck injury as a contributor to the cause of death. 3. And he flagged this as the most significant. He was unable to examine the airway and lungs for the presence of water, or the stomach for its contents. In a suspected drowning, those are central. 4. The original toxicology had not been received when he wrote the report. And a fifth constraint that runs through all of them. The condition of the body after 2 days in the water made it difficult to establish whether there were surface marks or bruising at all, a difficulty Dr. Mitchell noted is compounded during any second examination. There's one more thing he could not determine, and Crump called it the crux of the matter. Dr. Mitchell could not establish whether Nolan was conscious when he entered the water, or how he came to be in the water at all. That is the actual center of this case, not the discoloration. The question of how an 18-year-old ended up in the water, and what state he was in when it happened, which no examination of the body, first or second, has been able to answer. Now, none of this is an accusation against the state, and it's worth noting that Dr. Mitchell said so himself. He wrote that he did not know why the first pathologist kept the neck structures, but he added that it is not uncommon to retain them for additional testing where there are concerns about fracture or compression. His report described the practice as common in forensic pathology. Dr. Banerjee said the same independently. It is the first pathologist's call, and in a case this size, with a body in this condition, she would expect exactly that. The National Association of Medical Examiners takes the same position in its published guidance on second examinations. The State Medical Examiner's Office has responded, briefly. It said its examination followed the standard procedures and protocols used in all cases. It declined to comment on the independent findings, and it urged the public to stay patient and avoid drawing conclusions, warning that unfounded speculation creates obstacles for the investigation, which is a reasonable request. It also arrives after weeks of silence that let speculation fill the space. The deeper problem with this report isn't any single missing piece. It's structural, and it's the part Dr. Banerjee spent the most time explaining. Here's what almost nobody outside forensic pathology understands about a second examination, and it changes how you read every line of this report. By the time a second pathologist receives a body, the first examination has already been completed. That process is thorough by design. Organs are removed, measured, and examined internally rather than assessed from the outside. It is how any competent examination works, which means the second pathologist is not evaluating the body as it was found. Dr. Banerjee's word for it was manipulated. You have to work out what is present, what is absent, and what the first examination altered. She stopped short of calling a second pathologist handicapped, but she called it challenging. Now apply that to this specific report. Dr. Mitchell could not assess how much fluid was present in the lungs and airway. Why not? Because the first examination necessarily involves opening those structures, and doing so releases the fluid. By the time the body reached Washington, that measurement was no longer available, not through negligence, but as an unavoidable consequence of the first examination having happened. That's not a cover-up, that's sequence. And this is where the discoloration finding gets genuinely complicated. Dr. Banerjee raised two explanations that involve no one harming Nolan at all. The first is the natural settling of blood after death and after the initial examination. The second is the condition of the body itself. 2 days in warm Gulf water in July produces significant changes in tissue and major internal fluid movement. A large, indistinct area of discoloration with no apparent injury to the skin above it and no fracture beneath. That is precisely the kind of finding that could be real or could be a byproduct of those changes. Her position, plainly stated, she doesn't know what to make of it either. She read the report. She said she is trying not to overinterpret a finding when so much information is still outstanding, and she is not alone in that. Dr. Kendall Von Crowns, chief medical examiner in Tarrant County, Texas, who has no involvement in this case, told CNN the discoloration could represent changes in the musculature from the body's condition, or it could be from an impact to the back of the head and neck. 2 independent pathologists asked the same question, giving the same answer. It could be either. Neither will say which. Brian asked Dr. Banerjee directly whether Nolan could have been struck. Very difficult to say. A significant impact, she explained, generally leaves more than a single indistinct area. You would expect fracture or bleeding across a wider region or damage to the surface. Without examining it herself and seeing more images, she wouldn't go further. So consider where that leaves us. The most emotionally powerful finding in this report is one that 3 forensic pathologists have now separately declined to interpret. The one who found it wrote that its cause is unclear. 2 others, reading independently, each said it could go either way. That is not the same as nothing being there. Something was documented, measured, photographed. It is real. But there is a category difference between a finding exists that cannot yet be explained and a finding exists that proves what happened. Those collapsed almost immediately, and I don't think the collapse was malicious. It's what happens when a document full of careful hedges meets an audience that has waited weeks for something solid. The same problem runs through the toxicology, and this one is counterintuitive. Dr. Banerjee explained that toxicology is most reliable from the first examination. Samples are drawn from specific sites because substances shift position after death. Once the first examination is complete, those sites are no longer intact in the same way. And then the part that should stop anyone about to speculate about that day. A body in this condition generates alcohol on its own. It is a natural byproduct of the processes that follow death, and research indicates it can produce a reading as high as 0. 2, with no drinking involved whatsoever. Her instruction was unambiguous. You cannot assume anything about what Nolan did or didn't consume based on a positive alcohol reading in a body found in this condition. There is a partial workaround involving fluid from a more protected part of the body, but she doesn't know whether it was available here. Beyond that, it becomes professional judgment. She expects it to be a gray area and a point of contention. The same caution applies to the stomach. The reasoning is straightforward. Someone drowning may swallow water, so stomach contents form one piece of the picture. But her caveat was immediate. This was the 4th of July in Mississippi. Midsummer. Fluid could be swallowed water or something he drank on a hot day. It can't be reliably distinguished afterward. She extended that to drowning indicators generally, and this is the part I'd most want people to carry out of this episode. The presence of water in the body is not by itself proof of drowning. Research shows a body recovered from water can show it regardless, which means several findings that sound like they would settle this question cannot do that work alone. She kept returning to the one fact that does carry weight. Nolan was recovered from the water. If you're not in or near water, you don't drown. That is the anchor. Everything else is contested. So the real contradiction isn't between two pathologists. Both are saying the same thing, that the body alone cannot answer this. It's between a report built entirely on what cannot yet be established and a public conversation that has already decided. And while everyone waits, information that isn't accurate keeps being absorbed into this case as fact. At the press conference, Crump raised a question about what Nolan was wearing. Authorities have said Nolan was found wearing only swim trunks. Crump indicated the United Cajun Navy, which assisted in the search, had told the family he was also wearing a shirt. The implication he drew was that this didn't fit the account the family had been given. After the press conference, Brian Trasher of the United Cajun Navy disputed that directly to NBC News. He said he observed the recovery from the air, that Nolan was wearing only swim trunks, and that they matched photographs taken of him that day. So a detail that had entered this case as evidence of an inconsistency appears to rest on an account the cited source says is not what they conveyed. That's the second correction in this case. The first was a photograph, circulated early, that turned out to be from a different day than people believed. I want to be careful here, because there's a version of this segment that becomes an attack on Ben Crump, and I don't think that's warranted. There's no indication of deliberate misstatement. Details pass through multiple people. Someone's summary becomes someone else's quotation. It compounds. But it matters that it came from the family's own attorney at an official press conference. That's supposed to be the reliable end of the chain. And here's why it matters beyond the correction. Dr. Banerjee, asked about the volume of speculation around this case, said something I've been thinking about since. She said we can all sit here and ask what happened that day, and we simply aren't going to know yet. She called that kind of speculation harmful to the case, and then she said it was dangerous to the family. That's a forensic pathologist with no stake in the coverage saying the noise around this case is hurting the people it claims to serve. Consider the mechanism. Every unverified detail that circulates becomes something the family absorbs as fact about their son's last day. The clothing, the discoloration read as certainty. Each one is a specific, unbearable image, and some of them will turn out to be wrong. 2 already are, and the family has said what this has actually been like. Christine Wells-Wonsley said that since her son's death, members of the public have degraded her family, called her racist, and questioned their fundraising and their parenting. She said they are leaning on their faith, on each other, and on their community. Her stated reason for turning to Crump, to Sharpton, to the NAACP was simply that the help hadn't come from local authorities. She has also said the last time she heard from the sheriff's office was a day or 2 after her son's body was found on July 6, and called that silence heartbreaking and concerning. There's a second cost, and it's structural. Dr. Banerjee was direct about the limits of what an examination can do. A medical examiner has no authority to interview witnesses or examine phones. That's police work. The medical examiner is part of the investigating apparatus and depends on what investigators provide, and manner of death cannot be established without it. Then she named her actual worry. The investigation needs the phones, the interviews, the video from that day, because hundreds of people were on that island and that material exists. If it isn't shared, you're left with unanswered investigative questions, and that carries directly into what the examination can conclude. She acknowledged the human reality without excusing it. These are young men. Talking to investigators in a case this size is surely frightening. Put those together. Manner of death depends on the investigation. The investigation depends on cooperation from people who were there. And they are watching a case where unverified details circulate within hours. I don't know how to fix that. I do know that treating every fragment as confirmed makes it worse, and there is now a financial incentive attached. At the funeral, Rev. Al Sharpton announced a $50,000 reward from the National Action Network for information leading to an arrest and conviction. Within a day, it reached $125,000, matched by Tyler Perry, who also paid for the funeral service, with a further pledge from Terrell Owens. That's a serious sum, and it may produce information nothing else has. It will also produce claims from people who want it. Both things are true at once, which brings us to what is actually running right now. More processes are running simultaneously than most coverage acknowledges, and movement in one tells you almost nothing about the others. The state examination, completed July 7 by the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office. Findings not released, pending outstanding tests including toxicology. And here is the procedural detail that explains the delay. Jackson County Coroner Bruce Lynn Jr. said the state provides its report to the local coroner's office, but the decision to release it would have to come from the prosecutor's office. That is not a medical decision. It's a legal one. The independent examination. Dr. Roger Mitchell performed July 10 in Washington, report dated July 19, released July 22. Cause and manner undetermined, with foul play explicitly not excluded. The comparison that hasn't happened. It is not currently known whether the independent findings match or contradict the state's. Nobody can say, because one of the two reports isn't public. Crump has asked that Dr. Mitchell be given access to the state's photographs and observations from when the body was recovered, the material that would let him assess what he never got to see. Toxicology, still pending. Its own timeline, and per Dr. Banerjee, it will arrive carrying a significant caveat no matter what it says. The sheriff's investigation, open. Sheriff John Ledbetter has told ABC News he suspects drowning, even while the investigation remains active. The department has provided limited information and did not respond to Mississippi Today's requests for comment. The district attorney, Angel Myers McIlrath, met with the family on July 15. Crump has said she committed to presenting the case to a grand jury once the investigation concludes. Her office did not respond to Mississippi Today's request for comment. The federal question. The NAACP National Board adopted a resolution calling on local, state, and federal authorities, including the U.S. Department of Justice, to conduct a transparent review of how Nolan came to be left on the island and what happened before he was found. That is a request, not an investigation. No federal review has been announced in response. 7 processes, 7 timelines, 7 different standards for what counts as established. Why keeping them separate matters practically. The independent report coming back undetermined tells you very little about what the state will conclude. Dr. Mitchell worked without toxicology, without certain structures, and without seeing the body near the time it was recovered. The state had all of that. Those are different examinations facing different constraints, which brings me to the corrections and to why I'd ask you to be skeptical of this episode too. The photograph, circulated early, read as evidence about the timeline, from a different day than believed, publicly corrected. The clothing, attributed to the United Cajun Navy at the press conference, disputed by the Cajun Navy afterward. 2 corrections. Both felt significant. Both were repeated confidently before anyone checked. Neither involved anyone trying to deceive, which is exactly what makes this kind of error hard to catch. So here's the test I'd apply to anything that surfaces this week. Ask what category the claim is in. Is it in a document? Did a named person with relevant expertise say it on the record? Or did it reach you through someone summarizing what someone else said? The measurement is in a document. That's solid. The claim that it proves what happened to Nolan is not in that document. The pathologist who recorded it wrote that its cause is unclear. Two others, independently, said it could go either way. Same finding. Very different claims. Only one is sourced. And I'd hold this episode to the same standard. Most of what I've told you about the science tonight came from one forensic pathologist reading a preliminary report, a reading she hedged repeatedly, because she hasn't examined anything herself and doesn't have the state's findings either. She was careful. I've tried to be. This is still interpretation of a partial document, and when the state's report lands, some of it may need revising. That's the position everyone is in right now, including the family, waiting on one document that determines what all the others mean. The next thing that changes this case is the state's report, and there is no announced release date. That's not evasion, nobody has given one. But we now know more about why. The state completed its work July 7. What's outstanding is toxicology, and the release decision sits with the prosecutor's office, not the medical examiner, according to the county coroner. So this isn't a scientific delay at this point. It's a legal and prosecutorial one, running alongside a case the district attorney has reportedly committed to bringing before a grand jury. When it lands, here's what to watch, in order of how much it settles. The toxicology. No toxicology was performed as part of the independent examination. Dr. Mitchell wrote that the original results had not been received when he filed his report. The state's toxicology is still outstanding, and it is one of the tests holding up release. Whatever it shows will arrive with the caveat about what a body in this condition produces naturally, and it will be argued over regardless. The next structures. Whether the state's analysis of the structures it retained shows any injury. This is the one that addresses Dr. Mitchell's explicit statement that he could not rule out a neck injury as a contributor. The airway, lungs, and stomach, assessed at the time and in the condition Dr. Mitchell never got to see, and the discoloration which the state's report may not address at all. Dr. Mitchell said the medical examiner did not dissect that area. If that holds, the state's report won't resolve the question, and the only path to an answer is the one Crump has asked for, giving Dr. Mitchell access to the state's photographs and observations from when Nolan was recovered. Dr. Mitchell closed his report with 7 outstanding questions. Among them, what led Nolan to enter the water, whether there was water in his airway, and whether there was bleeding on the brain. Those are the questions the state's report either answers or doesn't. There's also a question of where those results get interpreted. Crump said Dr. Mitchell believes the proper venue to interpret the toxicology is before a grand jury, and that he wants Dr. Mitchell presented to that grand jury alongside the rest of the evidence and the cause and manner determination. Dr. Banerjee's read was that cause will likely relate to drowning, given where Nolan was found. Her real concern was manner, accident, or something else, or undetermined. That isn't decided by an examination at all. It's decided by the investigation, which means even a complete state report may not close this. If the material from that day doesn't get shared, manner could stay undetermined indefinitely. Dr. Banerjee named that as her worry, not that the science fails, but that the investigation leaves the science nothing to attach to. So, tonight's 3 threads. The independent report came back undetermined and went further than that, stating that non-accidental factors could not be ruled out, and that whether Nolan was conscious when he entered the water could not be established. The science underneath explains much of why. A second examination works with a body already examined, without toxicology, without certain structures, and in a condition that obscures surface findings and generates its own misleading signals. That's structural, not sinister. And a second detail has been publicly corrected, with the United Cajun Navy disputing the clothing account attributed to them. What remains unknown is almost everything the family wants to know. How Nolan came to be in the water, whether he was conscious when it happened, why a strong swimmer didn't make it back, why hundreds of people were on that island and no account covers the hours that matter, and what the people who were there are willing or able to say. None of that is in either report. It's in phone records and interviews, in video from a crowded island on a holiday weekend, material that exists, that Dr. Banerjee said the investigation needs, and that no medical examiner has the authority to go get. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18, a rising sophomore wide receiver at Southwest Mississippi Community College. Hundreds attended his funeral in Ocean Springs on July 20. 2 pathologists have now examined him. Neither has been able to tell his family how he died, and one of them says he cannot rule out that someone else was involved. The state finished its work on July 7, 17 days ago. The decision to release it now sits with a prosecutor. Nothing else moves until that happens.